Two experienced hikers, satellite equipment, a clear morning on a familiar trail, a registration log with the return time noted. Everything pointed to an ordinary weekend hike, but that's not how it turned out. What investigators uncovered over 2 years would forever change the way police in western North Carolina operate. It all began with a disappearance in the mountains. This is the case of the Calhoun brothers.
The morning of Saturday, August 14th, 2021, arrived in Asheville, North Carolina, the way summer mornings do in the Blue Ridge Mountains, slow and golden, with a heat already building behind the tree line before 7 o'clock, and the kind of humidity that settles into clothing like a second skin. By 7:15 in the morning, the Calloway family's single-story colonial on Ridgemont Drive was already active. The coffee maker had been running since 6:30. The smell of it, dark roast, slightly burnt at the bottom of the carafe, drifted through the screen door and hung on the porch where two backpacks sat propped against the railing, loaded and ready. Daniel Calloway was 26 years old. He had his mother's eyes, hazel, set wide apart, and his father's build, which was to say broad across the shoulders and economical with movement. The kind of man who covers ground without appearing to hurry. He worked as a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in downtown Asheville, and he had been hiking the trails of Pisgah National Forest since he was 9 years old. His gear was meticulous, a 45-liter Osprey Atmos pack, broken in over 3 seasons of backcountry trips, a Garmin InReach mini satellite communicator clipped to the left shoulder strap, a water filtration pump, bare canister, first aid kit, and 2 days' worth of food portioned into labeled Ziploc bags. His hiking poles were collapsed and strapped to the outside of the pack. He had packed them the night before, cross-referencing a checklist he kept on his phone. Marcus Calloway was 22 years old. Where Daniel was methodical, Marcus was instinctive, a senior at the University of North Carolina, Asheville, studying environmental science, with a thesis project loosely structured around measuring ground-level ozone concentrations at varying elevations in the Pisgah Basin. He carried a day pack rather than a full backpacking rig, and inside it, alongside the usual hiking supplies, were 2 handheld air quality sensors wrapped in foam padding, a field journal with a dark green cover, and 3 mechanical pencils rubber-banded together. He had been on this trail before, the Art Loeb Trail segment connecting Shining Rock Wilderness to Black Balsam Knob, twice in the preceding year. He knew the terrain. He had told his thesis advisor, Dr. Patricia Holm, that he planned to collect elevation gradient readings from 3 fixed stations he'd established on previous visits. He had emailed her the coordinates at 9:52 on the evening of Friday, August 13th. Their mother, Elaine Calloway, made eggs at 7:30 in the morning. She stood at the stove in bare feet and a terry cloth robe, and she remembers, or rather what she would later describe to investigators, that Marcus had come in from the porch and refilled his coffee mug and leaned against the counter and said something about the light that morning, something about how the mountains looked lit from the inside. She couldn't reproduce his exact words. She would say later, in a voice that had developed a particular flatness, that she hadn't paid enough attention, that she'd been watching the eggs. Their father, Robert Calloway, a retired electrician with a bad left knee and a weather radio he checked every morning, noted the forecast at 7:48, partly cloudy, high of 84 degrees Fahrenheit, a 20% chance of afternoon thunderstorms above 4,000 feet. He told his sons this. Daniel nodded and said they planned to be off the high ridge by 2 o'clock, well before any afternoon cell could develop. Robert studied his older son's face, the way fathers study their children when they're trying to remember them at a specific moment in time, without knowing that's what they're doing. At 8:03 in the morning, Daniel and Marcus Calloway loaded their packs into the bed of Daniel's gray 2018 Ford F-150 and backed out of the driveway. Elaine stood on the porch and waved. Marcus waved back through the open passenger window. Daniel honked once, a short, cheerful tap. The drive from Ridgemont Drive to the Black Balsam Knob Trailhead parking lot off Forest Road 816 north of the Blue Ridge Parkway takes approximately 47 minutes under normal conditions. Daniel's truck was equipped with a dash cam, a Vantrue N2 Pro, front and interior facing, and the footage, an entrasnell down dentit, which, later recovered by Buncombe County Sheriff's investigators, shows the 2 brothers talking and laughing for most of the drive. At one point, Marcus holds up his field journal and shows Daniel something he's sketched, a rough topographic cross-section of the ridge, and Daniel glances at it and says something that makes Marcus laugh. The audio quality is imperfect, and the exact words were never clearly transcribed. What is audible is the laughter. The truck entered the Forest Road 816 parking area at 8:51 in the morning. The parking lot, a gravel turnout shaded by red spruce and rhododendron, held 3 other vehicles at that time: a white Jeep Wrangler, a silver Toyota Camry with a North Carolina University parking sticker on the rear bumper, and a blue Honda CR-V. The parking lot is equipped with a single trail register box, a brown wooden structure mounted on a 4x4 post, stocked with paper slips and a stubby golf pencil. Trail register records, reviewed later, confirmed that Daniel Calloway signed the register at 8:57 in the morning. His entry read, Calloway ×2, Art Loeb's Shining Rock Loop, estimated return Sunday, August 15th, approximately 6 p.m. He printed his cell phone number beneath it in small, neat block numerals. They set out at approximately 9:05 in the morning. The sky above the ridgeline was clear and pale blue, the kind of clarity that comes before true heat. The temperature at trailhead elevation, approximately 5,800 feet, was 61 degrees Fahrenheit. The trail ascends almost immediately from the parking area, switchbacking through dense spruce fir forest before opening onto the exposed grassy balds that characterize the high terrain of the Shining Rock Wilderness. The wind at that elevation is almost constant, and it smells of wild grass and wet rock and something that is difficult to describe except as altitude itself. A couple, later identified as Greta and Thomas Vanzetti of Knoxville, Tennessee, both in their mid-50s, experienced hikers, passed the Calloway brothers on the trail at approximately 9:40 in the morning, heading in the opposite direction after an overnight trip. Greta Vanzetti would later describe Daniel as very friendly, confident-looking, and Marcus as younger, with a green backpack, writing something in a notebook while he walked. She said they exchanged trail conditions and that Marcus had asked her specifically about the weather at the High Bald. She told him it had been clear all morning, but that she'd seen lightning over Mount Hardy the evening before. Marcus had nodded and written something in his journal, she said. She estimated the interaction lasted no more than 3 minutes. That was the last confirmed sighting of Daniel and Marcus Calloway by anyone who was not implicated in what followed. By 10:15, based on their known pace and the terrain, they would have reached the first of Marcus's established air quality monitoring stations, a flat outcropping of Precambrian quartzite at approximately 6,050 feet, marked in his field journal as Station Alpha. The sky was still clear. The wind was coming from the northwest at 9 to 12 miles per hour. Below them, the ridgeline dropped away in long folds of dark green toward the Pigeon River watershed. It was a spectacular morning to be on a mountain. At 5:51 in the morning on Sunday, August 15th, Elaine Calloway began sending text messages to Daniel's cell phone. He had told her he planned to be back at the trailhead by 6 o'clock Sunday evening. By 7:15 Sunday evening, with no response and no sign of the truck at the trailhead, confirmed by Robert Calloway, who had driven up Forest Road 816 himself, Elaine called 911. The call was logged by Buncombe County Sheriff's Office dispatch at 7:22 in the evening on Sunday, August 15, 2021. The initial response to Elaine Calloway's 911 call came from Deputy First Class Aaron Medley, a 12-year veteran of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office who covered the southwestern rural sectors. Medley arrived at the Forest Road 816 parking area at 8:04 in the evening on Sunday, August 15th. Daniel's gray Ford F-150 was in the lot, exactly where it had been parked since Saturday morning. The truck was locked. Through the windows, Medley could see the cab was clean and undisturbed. 2 fast food wrappers on the passenger floor, a phone charging cable coiled on the center console, a baseball cap on the rear seat. He photographed the vehicle and ran the plates. He called the Calloway residence and spoke to Robert Calloway for 14 minutes. By 9:30 Sunday evening, the Buncombe County Emergency Services had formally initiated a search and rescue operation. The North Carolina State Highway Patrol provided 2 units for traffic and access control on the Forest Road. Pisgah National Forest Ranger Station personnel, specifically District Ranger Linda Osborne, who had worked the Shining Rock district for 9 years, were contacted and brought in as terrain consultants. Osborne arrived at the command post, a folding table, and a pair of propane lanterns set up at the trailhead at 10:47 Sunday night. The first ground teams went into the trail at 11:15 Sunday night, two 4-person teams, each led by a certified wilderness SAR specialist from the Western Carolina Mountain Rescue Squad. The temperature at the trailhead had dropped to 54 degrees. The teams carried headlamps, radios, and whistles. The trail was quiet except for the sound of boots on dirt and the persistent low chirping of insects in the rhododendron. The search expanded dramatically on Monday, August 16th. By 7 o'clock in the morning, a North Carolina emergency management helicopter, a Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk, configured for SAR operations, was conducting aerial sweeps of the Shining Rock wilderness. Ground teams now totaled 43 individuals, including volunteers from the Haywood County Search and Rescue Team and a 4-person cadaver dog unit from the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency. The weather had cooperated. Visibility was excellent, skies clear, wind light. Conditions were as good as they ever get for high-altitude search operations in the Blue Ridge. Robert Calloway stood at the command post for 18 consecutive hours on Monday. He is a large man, broad-shouldered like his sons, with gray hair cut close and hands roughened from decades of electrical work. He did not cry, at least not publicly. He drank coffee from a thermos and answered questions from investigators in a voice that was careful and even. And when he was not answering questions, he stood with his arms crossed and looked up at the ridgeline as though he could see through the trees to wherever his sons were. Elaine Calloway sat in the passenger seat of their Subaru Outback for most of that day, with the door open and her feet on the gravel, holding her phone in both hands. By Tuesday, August 17th, ground teams had covered an estimated 60% of the designated search grid, a 12-square-mile area centered on the Art Loeb Trail between the trailhead and Shining Rock itself. They had found nothing. No discarded food wrappers, no campfire remnants, no fragments of gear. The Jeep's track from Marcus's Garmin watch, a Fenix 6X Pro that automatically recorded his location every 30 seconds when in use, stopped at 11:14 in the morning on Saturday, August 14th. The last recorded coordinate placed Marcus at an elevation of approximately 6,140 feet on a section of trail approximately 2.3 miles northeast of the trailhead, near a drainage feature that Ranger Osborne identified from the topo map as Caldwell Branch Hollow. The hollow was searched on Tuesday afternoon. Steep-sided, choked with dense rhododendron thicket and yellow birch, it dropped sharply from the trail into a drainage gully that ran roughly northeast toward lower terrain. The search team that entered it, led by Western Carolina Mountain Rescue Specialist Derek Folds, a compact, sunburned man of 38 who had been doing wilderness SAR for 14 years, spent 2.5 hours working the drainage from the trail down to the gully floor and back. The cadaver dogs showed no alert. The underbrush was undisturbed. They found one thing. At the base of a yellow birch tree approximately 60 feet down the slope from the trail, Derek Folds found a mechanical pencil. It was a Pentel P205, matte black, with the eraser cap partially chewed, a habit Elaine Calloway would later, in a voice barely above a whisper, confirm was Marcus's. The pencil was lying on top of the leaf litter, not under it, which indicated it had not been there long. There were no other items nearby. No footprints in the soft ground of the gully, no disturbed vegetation suggesting a fall or slide, just the pencil, lying there in the damp shade of the hollow, pointing uphill. The pencil was photographed in situ at 3:47 in the afternoon on Tuesday, August 17th. It was bagged as evidence. Investigator Shona Pritchard of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Criminal Investigation Division, who had been assigned to the case that morning, a dark-haired woman of 41, with a habit of taking notes in 2 colors of ink, blue for facts and red for questions, examined it at the command post and noted in her report: condition, dry, clean, no soil adhesion, no organic debris, suggests placement within last 24 to 36 hours. Location inconsistent with accidental drop. Subject would have had to leave trail and descend approximately 18 to 20 meters into hollow. No explanation currently available for mechanism of placement. The search continued through Wednesday and Thursday. By Friday, August 20th, 6 days after the disappearance, the ground teams had been stood down to a reduced roster of 12. The aerial operation ended on Thursday. On Monday, August 23rd, the North Carolina Emergency Management formally suspended active search operations. Total search area covered, approximately 8,400 acres. Total personnel deployed over the course of the operation, 211. Evidence recovered, 1 mechanical pencil, 1 partial boot print near the ridge crest, size 11 men's, consistent with Daniel Calloway's documented footwear, and a single fragment of what appeared to be a blue synthetic material, possibly nylon, caught on a laurel branch approximately 400 meters east of the pencil location. The fragment was too small and too degraded by weather exposure to be positively identified. The case was classified as missing, circumstances unknown. The file landed on the desk of investigator Shona Pritchard, where it sat in a manila folder marked with a red paper clip, her system for cases she was not prepared to file and forget. The Calloway brothers had vanished into a mountain on a clear August morning, in the presence of a satellite communicator, a Jeep's watch, and 39 years of combined hiking experience, and left behind nothing but a chewed pencil in a hollow and a silence so complete it felt constructed.
This is exactly where the investigation hit a dead end, and it's important to understand why. 211 people, 3,000 hectares, perfect weather, and all they found was a pencil, a boot print, and a scrap of fabric. It's not about the rescuers doing a poor job, the problem was that they were searching in the wrong place. All efforts were focused on searching for people lost within the boundaries of the National Forest. No one thought to check the secluded private property located 4 miles northeast of the parking lot. The pencil was the one strange and peculiar detail, and investigator Pritchard made a careful note of it. Its specific location simply didn't fit into any random scenario. 2 years later, that single line in his notebook would turn out to be very important indeed.
The house on Ridgemont Drive changed in ways that were not dramatic, but were total. Elaine Calloway repainted the hallway in October 2021, a decision she made without being able to explain it. Standing in the paint aisle of a hardware store and picking a color called antique linen because it seemed neutral. She did not change the boys' rooms. Daniel's room retained the neat, spare quality of a person who had recently packed for a trip and intended to return. Marcus's room retained the organized chaos of a graduate student in the middle of a project. Stacks of journal articles, a topographic map of the Pisgah Basin pinned to the corkboard above his desk, a half-finished mug of tea, long since evaporated down to a faint dark ring, on the corner of the desk beside his laptop. Robert Calloway drove up Forest Road 816 every Saturday morning for the first 4 months. He parked in the gravel lot and walked the first mile of trail with a folder of printed photographs, Daniel and Marcus's faces, their heights and weights and last known clothing, stapled to the inside of a plastic sleeve. He posted the photographs on the trail register box, on trees at the trailhead, on the bulletin board at the Pisgah Inn. He talked to every hiker he encountered. Most of them had heard about the Calloway brothers. The story had received significant local news coverage in the days following the disappearance, and they were sympathetic and recalled nothing useful. A few claimed possible sightings that investigator Pritchard had already evaluated and ruled out. By January 2022, Robert's Saturday drives had become less regular. By March, they had stopped. His left knee had required surgery in December. He did not go back up the mountain in the same way again. The story had its moment of national attention. A 9-minute segment on a true crime podcast, Vanished, hosted by journalist Cassandra Fell, aired in September 2021 and generated approximately 4,000 listener tip submissions to the Buncombe County Sheriff's tip line. Investigator Pritchard and her colleague Detective Ben Hartley worked through the tips methodically. None were actionable. A segment on the America's Missing television program aired in November 2021. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Adults listed both brothers. Their photographs appeared on the NCMEA website alongside 214,000 other entries. Dr. Patricia Holm, Marcus's thesis advisor, kept his enrollment active at the university through the spring 2022 semester. It was a bureaucratic fiction, a kindness she could offer in the absence of any other, and she was quietly asked to resolve it by the registrar's office in August 2022. She had the conversation with Elaine Calloway on the phone, and she later described it as one of the hardest telephone calls of her professional life. She kept a copy of Marcus's thesis draft, 23 pages, complete through chapter 2, ending mid-sentence in a section on particulate matter dispersion coefficients, in a folder in her filing cabinet for years afterward. There was one person who did not stop. Her name was Claire Sorrento. She was 34 years old in 2021, a former Park Service volunteer turned part-time outdoor recreation instructor at AB Tech Community College in Asheville, and she was Daniel Calloway's girlfriend. They had been together for 3 years and 2 months. She had been at a family wedding in Raleigh the weekend Daniel and Marcus disappeared, a fact she would replay in the precise, mechanical way of someone who has learned to stop attaching emotion to it. She had spoken to Daniel by phone at 6:42 in the evening on Saturday, August 14th, when he should already have been deep on the trail. He had not answered. She had left a voicemail she described only as normal and would not repeat its contents to anyone. Claire Sorrento continued hiking the Shining Rock Wilderness and the Art Loeb Trail corridor on a near-weekly basis through 2022 and into 2023. She told people it was for her fitness. She carried an extra copy of the search map from the original SAR operation, marked up with Derek Folds' grid notes, which she had obtained through a public records request. She explored drainage features and off-trail hollows that the original search had flagged as checked but not fully surveyed, distinctions that look trivial on a spreadsheet and feel significant on a steep hillside in the rain. She kept a log of every excursion in a spiral-bound notebook: date, time, terrain covered, observations, weather conditions. In October 2022, she found a section of blue nylon webbing, approximately 8 inches long, consistent with backpack strap material, caught beneath a rock overhang in a drainage approximately a quarter-mile east of Caldwell Branch Hollow. She bagged it and brought it to investigator Pritchard. Pritchard submitted it for analysis. The lab matched the weave and dye lot to Osprey's 2018 to 2019 production run, consistent with Daniel Calloway's pack, but could not confirm it as a piece of his specific equipment. Pritchard noted the submission in the case file and updated her red paper clipped folder. The sensation of those years, for the Calloways, for Claire, for the investigators and the searchers and the people who had passed the brothers on the trail that morning, was not grief exactly. Grief requires a body. What they had was something else, a specific variety of suspension, like a photograph developing in chemical solution, the image perpetually forming but never quite arriving into clarity. Robert Calloway would sit on the porch in the evenings and listen to the weather radio. Elaine kept the porch light on every night. Claire Sorrento began teaching a wilderness navigation course at AB Tech in the spring of 2023, and she was, by all accounts, a precise and patient instructor. The mountain did not give anything back, not until Thursday, June 8, 2023, when everything changed in the space of about 45 seconds. The group was a college trail crew, 6 students, and a faculty supervisor from Warren Wilson College's Environmental Studies program, conducting a routine volunteer maintenance hike on the Art Loeb Trail as part of their summer field course. Their task for the day was clearing blowdowns and checking for erosion damage along a 3-mile section of trail between Ivestor Gap and the Black Balsam Spur. It was a Thursday, June 8, 2023. The sky was overcast, the temperature at elevation about 67 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air smelled of rain that had fallen the night before and left everything saturated and glistening. At approximately 11:20 in the morning, a 20-year-old student named Brianna Oxner, a second-year environmental studies major from Brevard, North Carolina, slight and quick-moving, with a yellow rain jacket and a penchant for wandering slightly off the maintained tread to look at things, followed a thread of what she would describe as a strange smell down a slope approximately 200 meters northeast of the junction where the Art Loeb Trail meets the Ivestor Gap connector. The slope was steep and heavily vegetated, dominated by blueberry scrub and mountain laurel. The smell, she would say later, was earthy but not natural, like something made of metal and old wood, and something else she couldn't name. She pushed through approximately 15 feet of laurel thicket and found herself at the entrance to a cave. It was not large. The opening was roughly 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, oriented northeast, and partially masked by a ledge of exposed quartzite that served as a natural overhang. The floor of the cave at the entrance was compacted earth and stone, dry despite the surrounding wet conditions. The darkness inside was complete beyond the first few feet. Brianna Oxner did not enter the cave. She stood at its entrance for what she estimated was about 10 seconds, and then she called for her faculty supervisor, Dr. James Farrow, a 52-year-old former wilderness guide with a white beard and the particular calm of someone who has dealt with many unexpected things in the field, as loudly as she could without quite screaming. Farrow arrived at the cave entrance at approximately 11:26 in the morning. He had a headlamp in his day pack. He crouched at the entrance, clicked the headlamp on, and swept the beam inside. The cave extended into the rock at a slight downward angle, perhaps 5 feet deep initially, then widening into what appeared to be a larger chamber beyond a narrow constriction. In the first 5 feet, in the beam of Farrow's headlamp, he could see a sleeping bag or blanket, flattened and molded with age, dark green, a plastic water bottle, the label bleached away, a metal cup on its side, and what appeared to be writing on the cave wall, scratched into the rock surface at approximately 2 feet above the floor. Farrow did not enter the cave. He turned to his students, all 6 of whom had followed him down the slope and were now clustered at the edge of the laurel thicket, their trail work entirely forgotten, and told them in a steady voice to move back to the main trail and stay there. He called 911 at 11:31 in the morning. Buncombe County Sheriff's Deputy Marla Jessen arrived at the trailhead at 12:48 in the afternoon. She was guided to the cave location by Farrow, who waited on the trail. She entered the cave with a tactical flashlight and noted what she found in real time over her radio: the sleeping bag or blanket, the plastic water bottle, the metal cup, 2 more objects near the back of the cave's first chamber, what appeared to be a field journal with a dark green cover and a mechanical pencil. She did not disturb them. She exited the cave, established a perimeter, and called investigator Shona Pritchard directly. Pritchard arrived at 2:17 in the afternoon. She had driven from downtown Asheville in 51 minutes. She pulled on nitrile gloves before she entered the cave, and she crouched in the entrance for a full 2 minutes before she moved, sweeping her flashlight methodically from left to right and then from floor to ceiling. The first chamber of the cave was approximately 6 feet wide and 8 feet deep, with a ceiling varying from 4 to 5 feet in height. The floor was hard-packed dirt and gravel. There was evidence of long occupation, a section of floor near the back wall that had been smoothed flat and covered with a layer of dried moss, a ring of stones that had served as a fire pit, blackened with use, centered beneath a natural crack in the ceiling that functioned as a crude chimney. The remnants of several different types of food packaging, flattened and stacked. The air inside was cool, perhaps 55 degrees, and smelled of cold stone and ash and something faintly organic. Pritchard photographed everything before touching anything. Then she picked up the field journal, the green field journal with the dark brown water staining on its lower right corner, the one with M. Calloway, UNCAENV.SCI. Printed on the inside front cover in black marker, in a hand she had seen on the trail register entry from August 14, 2021. She sat on the cave floor and read it. The initial pages were standard field notes, dates, coordinates, sensor readings, observations about cloud cover and wind direction, the shorthand notation of a graduate student deep in his data. Then, on page 47, the entries changed. August 14th, approximately 1200, in the cave. D with me. We found it while he was trying to reach higher ground for the Garmin. Something wrong with the trail, or with us, or with the terrain. D's ankle. Came down fast. Cave as shelter. Will reevaluate. August 14th, late afternoon. D's ankle significantly swollen. Right lateral. He thinks sprained, maybe worse. Rain now. Staying. August 15th, morning. Rain stopped. Trying to signal. Garmin. Battery. D can't walk distance. I'm going to try to reach trail. Left Marcus a note. That doesn't make sense. I wrote that wrong. I left D a note, going for help. The entries continued. They became shorter over time, the handwriting shifting in ways that spoke without words about what was happening in the body holding the pencil. But they were there. 41 entries, 41 dates. The most recent was dated May 3rd, 2023. More than 627 days after Daniel and Marcus Calloway had walked into the Shining Rock Wilderness on a clear August morning. Pritchard identified Daniel Calloway's handwriting from his trail register entry. She identified Marcus Calloway's handwriting from a class assignment she obtained through the university. During the original investigation, both brothers had written in that journal. Both had been in that cave. She called the Calloway residence at 4:44 in the afternoon on Thursday, June 8, 2023. Robert Calloway answered on the second ring. She spoke carefully and precisely, as she had been trained to do, and told him that evidence recovered that afternoon in the Shining Rock wilderness strongly suggested that his sons had been in the area of the search and may have survived their initial disappearance for a significant period of time. There was a silence on the line that lasted approximately 8 seconds. Then Robert Calloway said, "Are they alive?" Pritchard told him they did not yet know. She told him they would work through the night to find out. The forensics team arrived at the cave at 5:30 in the afternoon. The Pisgah National Forest Incident Command structure was reactivated by 6 o'clock. By 7:15, fresh search teams were moving through the Shining Rock wilderness with dogs and lights, and the kind of focused urgency that comes from evidence rather than hope.
The journal is key evidence in this case, not just for what is written in it, but for its existence. Marcus was a scientist who studied Levics. When everything got out of control, he started documenting and didn't stop, even when most people would have given up long ago. Thanks to this, investigators received 41 entries over almost 2 years, dates, observations, a chronology of events, things the original search never had. An exact picture of what happened. The journal didn't just reopen the case, it completely rewrote it. A disappearance in the wilderness turned into a crime scene with eyewitness testimony. This changes everything.
At 9:03 in the evening, a search dog, a Belgian Malinois named Creta, handled by specialist Donna Fox of the Haywood County Unit, alerted at a location approximately 340 meters northeast of the cave, in a depression in the terrain partially obscured by a dense stand of red spruce. Donna Fox called the alert over the radio, and for a moment the entire search operation held its breath. What Creta had found was not a body, it was a camp. A survived camp, a small, carefully arranged improvisation of materials, 2 spruce branches forming a lean-to frame, a section of emergency mylar blanket fixed to the underside of the branches with stones, a collection of water-gathering implements, fashioned from materials that had been repurposed from gear, a ring of rocks, a stub of candle burned almost to nothing, a boot, 1 boot, size 11, Merrill Moab, 2 GT, right foot, in reasonable condition, and sitting upright against the base of a large spruce tree, wrapped in a space blanket and the remains of what had once been a green synthetic sleeping bag, with beard growth of several weeks and eyes that did not quite focus on the approaching lights, was Marcus Calloway. He was alive. He was 24 years old. He weighed, as measured at the mobile medical unit deployed to the trailhead at 9:47 that evening, 108 pounds. He had abrasions on both hands. He had frostbite scarring on the toes of his right foot. He had a femur fracture in his left leg that had healed improperly, leaving him with a gait that would require corrective surgery. His core temperature on initial assessment was 95.8 degrees Fahrenheit, mild hypothermia. His blood pressure was low. He was severely dehydrated and malnourished. He was alive and he could speak. And the first words he said to Donna Fox, who reached him before the medics, were not about himself. He said, "Daniel, you need to find Daniel." The search for Daniel Calloway was reoriented from that moment. Marcus, once his condition was stabilized and he had been transported by helicopter to Mission Hospital in Asheville, provided a statement, fragmented but coherent, given in pieces over the course of several hours, that reframed the entire investigation. His testimony, combined with the physical evidence recovered from the cave and the surrounding terrain, began to reconstruct a sequence of events that no one had anticipated. Because what happened to the Calloway brothers on that mountain was not a simple survival story. What the journal, the camp, the cave, and Marcus's testimony revealed was something darker and more deliberate than anyone standing in that gravel parking lot in August 2021 had been prepared to imagine. The full picture assembled itself over the course of several weeks, built from Marcus Calloway's testimony, the evidence recovered from the cave, and an investigation that quickly expanded beyond the boundaries of Pisgah National Forest. What follows is a reconstruction based on the official investigative record, On the morning of Saturday, August 14, 2021, at approximately 1100, Daniel and Marcus Calloway encountered a man on the Art Loeb Trail, approximately 2.1 miles from the trailhead. The man was later identified as Raymond Earl Cutler, age 58, a resident of a property in rural Haywood County, located approximately 4 miles northeast of the Black Balsam Trailhead, accessible by a private, unpaved road that intersected with Forest Road 816 approximately 1 mile east of the parking lot. Cutler had been a licensed outfitter and wilderness guide in western North Carolina for nearly 2 decades. He held a valid Pisgah National Forest commercial use permit. He was, by all outward measures, an unremarkable man, slightly built, with a sunburned face and a graying beard, wearing Carhartt work pants and a faded orange hiking shirt with the logo of an outfitting company, Western Ridge Expeditions, his own small operation, on the chest pocket. He walked with a slight forward lean, as though perpetually ready to start moving. He knew the terrain extremely well. Marcus Calloway's testimony described a man who seemed, at first encounter, helpful. Daniel had turned his ankle on a loose rock section of trail approximately 200 meters before they reached him. Not a serious injury, or so it seemed in the first minutes. A sharp lateral twist, enough to make him wince and sit down on a trailside rock and unlace his boot to look at it. Cutler had come down the trail toward them and stopped and crouched beside Daniel and spoke with the practiced authority of a man who has triaged trail injuries many times. He had suggested they come to a place he described as a field cabin, a shelter he used for overnight guided trips, he said, approximately 20 minutes off trail to the northeast. He said he had a first aid kit, he had a satellite phone, he could contact the ranger station. He was calm and specific and gave no reason to distrust him. Marcus Calloway would later say, in the measured but hollowed-out voice that became characteristic of his testimony, he knew exactly what to say. He knew exactly how much to say. He didn't rush us. He waited. They followed Raymond Earl Cutler off the trail. The field cabin was real. It was a structure Cutler had built on a section of private land he leased from a timber company, a parcel that abutted the National Forest boundary in a drainage northeast of Caldwell Branch Hollow. It was a one-room plank structure, approximately 12 by 16 feet, with a metal roof and 2 small windows covered with hardware cloth. Around its perimeter, concealed under decades of accumulated leaf litter and moss, was a heavy-gauge steel livestock fence, the kind used to pen cattle, driven into the ground to a depth of 18 inches and extending to a height of 6 feet, with the upper section angled inward and fitted with barbed wire. The gate was padlocked. The construction was old but reinforced, and it did not look, from the outside, like a prison. It looked like what it was supposed to look like, a rough, somewhat overgrown outfitter's camp in the woods. The first aid kit was real. There was a satellite phone. Cutler had treated Daniel's ankle. It was a grade 2 sprain, Cutler had correctly identified, and he had made what appeared to be a call. The call was not to the ranger station. Analysis of Cutler's satellite phone records, obtained with a warrant, showed no outgoing call was made on August 14, 2021. None. The motion he had made with the phone, the brief, authoritative exchange he'd conducted, yes, got 2 hikers, one with an ankle injury, gonna keep them at the site overnight, weather's turning, had been a performance. There was no one on the other end of the call. That night, Cutler had locked the gate. In the days and weeks that followed, the picture that emerged from Marcus's testimony, from the cave journal, and from the forensic examination of the property was of a confinement that operated through a sophisticated combination of physical constraint and psychological manipulation. Cutler had presented himself not as a captor, but as a reluctant host, someone obligated by circumstances to keep them safe, who kept promising that the situation would resolve, that the ankle needed more time, that the weather was bad, that he was waiting for a window to safely walk Daniel out. He fed them. He provided water. He was never physically violent in the early weeks. He confiscated their gear, incrementally, always with a reasonable explanation, and had disabled and hidden their electronics in the first 24 hours. The journal was the record of the realization. It happened slowly, and the progression is documented with the dispassionate precision of a trained scientist who had learned to record observations without letting the observation destroy him. The early entries maintained the language of the emergency and the inconvenience. By week 3, a different language had appeared, quiet and careful, clearly written with the awareness that it might be read by someone other than its author. By October 2021, Daniel Calloway had made 3 attempts to leave the property. The fence was the obstacle each time. On the 3rd attempt, Marcus's entry for October 19th reads only, "D went last night, came back before morning, won't say more." He had injured his already compromised ankle again, and had been returned by Cutler in what Marcus described as a state of controlled calm that Marcus found more frightening than any anger would have been.
From Marcus's testimony, it's clear. Cutler used almost no physical force. The fence kept them in place. Everything else was psychological. Cutler saw himself as a helper, not a jailer. He carefully manipulated how the brothers perceived time, safety, and their available options. He deliberately engineered a situation in which the most reasonable choice, to wait, was exactly what he wanted. This is a classic model of coercive control, and it works on intelligent, experienced people. Daniel was an engineer with years of hiking experience, Marcus, a trained researcher. Neither of them was being careless or naive. But this specific method isn't designed for such an obvious threat. By the time the danger became clearly obvious, the fence was already firmly in place.
In April 2022, Marcus had found the cave. He had been permitted limited movement within a designated radius of the cabin. Part of Cutler's methodology was to allow just enough latitude to prevent total psychological collapse, and he had reached the cave during one of these excursions. He had begun using it as a secondary refuge, carrying items there in small quantities over weeks. The extra sleeping bag, the water bottle, the field journal, the pencils. He had been building, slowly and deliberately, what he would describe to investigators as an exit plan that doesn't depend on going through the gate. The gate had no internal handle, but the fence, in one location at its northeast corner, rested on a section of rocky ground that had shifted over years of frost heave, creating a gap approximately 9 inches wide at the base. Marcus had spent 4 months widening it by fractions, working at night with a piece of quartzite he had found and shaped. He did not tell Daniel about the gap until it was large enough to crawl through. On the night of May 2nd, 2023, both brothers went through the gap. Daniel's ankle, the one from the original injury, inadequately healed and re-injured multiple times, gave out 200 meters from the property boundary. He went down on a slope in the dark and could not get up. Marcus could not carry him. They had agreed on a contingency. If one was unable to move, the other would continue to the trail and get help, while the other sheltered. It was the plan of people who have had considerable time to think about contingencies. Marcus left Daniel with the mylar blanket, the remaining food and water they had carried from the cave, and the field journal. He wrote a note inside the back cover. If found, contact Buncombe County Sheriff, Investigator Pritchard, name D. Calloway, and propped it against Daniel's chest. He walked through the night and through the following day. He reached the general area of the Art Loeb Trail on the morning of May 3rd and collapsed near the Spruce Depression, where Donna Fox and Creta would find him 37 days later. He had been unable to move since then. He had survived on rain catchment and whatever edible material he could reach without standing.
4 months. That's how long Marcus spent widening the 23-centimeter gap in the fence with a piece of sharpened quartzite. At night, millimeter by millimeter, unnoticed. Their plan for what to do if one of them couldn't go on wasn't made in a panic. They had thought it through and agreed on it in advance. Escaping from that compound wasn't a dramatic last-minute rescue. It was the result of patient, methodical work that Marcus had carried out for over a year alongside his imprisonment. He wasn't waiting to be found. He was preparing his own way out. That's why investigators called the northeast corner of that fence the main piece of evidence in the entire case.
The search for Daniel Calloway began immediately following Marcus's first coherent testimony at Mission Hospital at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on June 9th, 2023. At 6:30 in the morning, a ground team led by Derek Folds, the same Western Carolina mountain rescue specialist who had found the mechanical pencil in Caldwell Branch Hollow 22 months earlier, located Daniel Calloway in a depression approximately 180 meters from the Haywood County property boundary. He was alive? Barely. His core temperature was 93.1 degrees Fahrenheit. His right ankle was catastrophically swollen, and the injury was consistent with a complex fracture. He was dehydrated to the edge of circulatory compromise. But he was alive, and when Folds crouched beside him and said his name, Daniel Calloway opened his eyes and looked at him with a clarity that Folds would later describe quietly in a television interview, visibly struggling to maintain the professional composure he had spent a career cultivating as the most alive thing he had ever seen in a human face. Raymond Earl Cutler was arrested at his primary residence in Haywood County at 7:44 in the morning on June 9, 2023. He was in his kitchen making oatmeal when sheriff's deputies and an FBI special agent knocked on his door. He answered it holding a wooden spoon, wearing a plaid bathrobe. He did not run. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the badges and the warrant, and then, according to arresting Deputy Keith Allister, he set the spoon on the counter and said, in a conversational tone, "I suppose I know what this is about." He was handcuffed and led to a vehicle and placed inside. Neighbors on his rural road, the Faulkner family to the north, the retired couple Len and Grace Piat to the south, watched from their driveways with expressions that would later be described by the local paper as stunned disbelief. Raymond Cutler had lived on that road for 21 years. He had loaned Len Piat a chainsaw in November. He had shoveled the Faulkners' driveway during an ice storm in February. The property search was conducted by a joint team of Buncombe County Sheriff's investigators, Haywood County Sheriff's investigators, and FBI agents beginning at 9 o'clock in the morning on June 9th. They entered through the main gate of the property, which Cutler had locked and which was breached with bolt cutters. The property was 4.2 acres, densely wooded except for a clearing in the center where the field cabin stood. The cabin was photographed in total before entry. From the outside, a single structure, weathered but maintained, with a wood stack on one side and a propane tank on the other, and a pair of hiking boots drying on the porch railing. A bird feeder mounted on a post near the south window. The kind of place that looks like 1,000 other rural outfitters' cabins in the western North Carolina mountains. Inside, investigators found 2 sets of bedding on cots, clearly used over a long period, a camp stove and fuel supply, a large plastic storage container holding food, canned goods, dried beans and rice, emergency rations, 2 backpacks that were identified as the property of Daniel and Marcus Calloway, a Garmin InReach mini satellite communicator in a zippered bag, battery removed, a Garmin Fenix 6 Pro watch in the same bag, 2 cell phones, powered off, a first aid kit, a collection of tools, and, in a locked metal box bolted to the cabin floor, a collection of documents. The documents in the metal box were the element of the investigation that shifted the case from a serious kidnapping into a pattern. There were photographs, dozens of them, printed on standard copy paper, of other hikers on various trails in the region, taken from a distance with what appeared to be a telephoto lens. There were handwritten notes, names, descriptions, dates, trail locations. There were 11 entries. Daniel and Marcus Calloway were entries 7 and 8, annotated in Cutler's small, precise handwriting with dates and brief operational notes. The first entry was dated 2009. The other entries were referred to the FBI's Crimes Against Persons unit. That investigation is ongoing and falls outside the scope of this account. What the search of the property confirmed, yard by yard and item by item, was the portrait of a man who had constructed a methodology over years, a methodology of selection, approach, and detention that had been refined through practice into something disturbingly efficient, and who had lived his daily life on one side of a fence and kept his captives, in the most literal sense, on the other. The northeast corner of the fence, the section where Marcus Calloway had spent 4 months widening a 9-inch gap with a piece of shaped quartzite, was photographed extensively. In the forensic record, it appears as a small, unremarkable section of galvanized steel fence wire, slightly spread at its base, partially obscured by moss. It does not look like a door. It does not look like an escape route. It looks like a section of old fencing that has shifted over time. It was the bravest thing Shona Pritchard had ever seen documented in a case file, and she said so, in those exact words, to Ben Hartley in the parking lot of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office at 10 o'clock at night on June 9, 2023, before getting in her car and driving home and sitting in her driveway for 20 minutes before she went inside. The federal indictment of Raymond Earl Cutler, filed in the Western District of North Carolina on August 4, 2023, charged him with 2 counts of kidnapping under Title 18 of the United States Code, 2 counts of unlawful imprisonment, 2 counts of obstruction relating to his deliberate interference with the 2021 search and rescue operation, and 1 count of weapons possession in connection with a federal crime. The federal charges were brought in conjunction with state charges filed by the Haywood County District Attorney's Office, which included additional counts related to the pattern evidence found in the metal box. The trial opened on February 12, 2024, in the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina in Asheville. Judge Patricia Wentworth presiding. The prosecution was led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Della Romero, a sharp and methodical attorney of 47, who had spent the preceding 7 months preparing with the thoroughness of a person who intends to leave nothing to chance. The defense was led by court-appointed attorney Gerald Sims, who argued throughout that Cutler had genuinely believed he was providing care and shelter, that his actions, however irregular, had been motivated by misguided protectiveness rather than criminal intent, and that the brothers had been free to leave at any time. The fence, Sims argued, was a pre-existing livestock structure unrelated to Cutler's intentions. Prosecutor Romero presented the forensic report on the fence, specifically on the gap at the northeast corner, documented in photographs and physical measurements, which showed evidence of progressive mechanical widening consistent with sustained manual effort using a hard, narrow instrument. She presented the quartzite tool recovered from the cave. She presented Marcus Calloway's detailed testimony about the 4 months of nocturnal work required to create the opening. She presented Daniel Calloway's documented ankle injuries, assessed by orthopedic surgeon Dr. Fiona Krebs, which showed 3 distinct stages of traumatic damage and re-injury consistent with the timeline described in the journal. She presented a satellite phone call log that showed no outgoing calls on August 14, 2021. And she presented 41 journal entries, read in their entirety to the jury by court recorder James Abel, in a voice that remained steady throughout, though those present in the gallery reported that the courtroom was absolutely silent from the first entry to the last. Raymond Earl Cutler took the stand. He was calm, precise, and presented himself as a man who had made extraordinary efforts to help 2 injured hikers and had, through a series of escalating misunderstandings, found himself in an impossible situation. He spoke about Daniel's ankle with what appeared to be genuine clinical concern. He spoke about winter conditions and trail safety. He expressed what looked, on the surface, like regret, a careful, qualified regret that never quite located responsibility in himself. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 32 minutes. Raymond Earl Cutler was found guilty on all federal counts on March 7, 2024. He was sentenced by Judge Wentworth on May 22, 2024, to 2 consecutive life sentences on the kidnapping charges, with additional years added for the obstruction and weapons counts. He was remanded to federal custody immediately. He was taken from the courtroom in handcuffs, and he did not look at the gallery. The gallery included Robert and Elaine Calloway, seated in the second row, their hands interlinked, Claire Sorrento seated directly behind Elaine, Dr. Patricia Home, Ranger Linda Osborne, Derek Folds, Donna Fox, and investigator Shona Pritchard, who sat in the back row alone and who watched Cutler exit the courtroom and then looked down at her notebook, blue ink, red ink, and wrote a single word in red ink and then put the cap back on the pen. The word, photographed incidentally by a journalist from the Asheville Citizen-Times who was seated in the same row, was done. Daniel Calloway was discharged from Mission Hospital in Asheville on August 2, 2023, following a right ankle reconstruction surgery, physical rehabilitation for severe deconditioning, and structured psychological support. He lost 12 pounds during his captivity that he never entirely regained. He moved back into the house on Ridgemont Drive for a period of months, and then moved into an apartment in West Asheville, alone, a fact that surprised no one who had watched the way he sometimes went still in the middle of conversations, in the way of a person who has learned to check the walls before he relaxes. He went back to structural engineering. His firm had held his position as a form of institutional faith, a decision led by his senior colleague Tamara Griggs, who had told the partners in August 2021 that she did not want Daniel's desk touched. She had not explained why she felt so certain. She had turned out to be right. Marcus Calloway returned to UNC Asheville in the spring of 2024. He met with Dr. Patricia Holm, who had kept the unfinished thesis in her filing cabinet for 2.5 years, and he asked her in a manner that was characteristically direct. Friends who know him describe an economy of language that appeared, or intensified, after the mountain, if she thought the project was still worth completing. She said she thought it was among the most important work she had seen from an undergraduate researcher in 20 years. Marcus Calloway completed his thesis on atmospheric particulate matter in the Blue Ridge Escarpment ecosystem in November 2024. He defended it on December 4, 2024. The committee voted to accept it with distinction. He dedicated it to his brother. Claire Sorrento continued teaching at AB Tech. In the wilderness navigation course she taught in the spring of 2024, the semester after the trial, she added a new section to her curriculum on signaling and communication redundancy in backcountry environments. She cross-referenced it with a case study she did not name, but which her students, if they followed the regional news, could identify. She presented it without editorializing, with maps and timelines, and a list of items she suggested every backcountry traveler carry. One of the items on the list was a mechanical pencil and a waterproof field journal. Greta Vanzetti, the hiker who had passed the brothers on the trail that morning, sent a card to the Calloway family after the verdict. She wrote that she had thought about Marcus writing in his green notebook every day since she read the first news article in August 2021. She wrote that she was glad she had seen what she'd seen, a young man writing in a notebook while he walked, because it meant she had seen him being exactly himself, and that seemed important. Robert Calloway still drives up Forest Road 816 occasionally. Not every Saturday. His knee is not what it was. But when the weather is right and the season is right, he parks in the gravel lot and walks the first mile of trail. He does not carry photographs anymore. He carries a thermos of coffee, and he looks at the mountains the way people look at things they nearly lost and did not. And there is no clean word for what that expression is. His sons are alive. They are in the same city where they grew up. He can call them on the phone. Elaine Calloway turned the porch light off some months after Daniel and Marcus came home. She is not sure exactly when. She thinks it was a night in autumn, when it was too warm to leave the light on, and it no longer felt like a signal, because the people she had been signaling were home. She has left it off since then. She sleeps mostly, in a way she did not for 2 years, and some months. In the Shining Rock Wilderness, the Art Loeb Trail continues north from the Black Balsam Knob trailhead, through the High Balds, and into the Spruce Fir Zone, as it has for decades. The trail register box at the trailhead has been replaced. The original one deteriorated over time, and the new one is made of the same brown wood and stocked with the same small paper slips and a short pencil. Hikers sign their names before they go in. The mountain does not offer guarantees to anyone who enters it. It never has. The cave in the drainage northeast of Ivester Gap is still there. Brianna Oxner, who found it on a Thursday morning in June with a trail crew and a yellow rain jacket and a thread of strange smell, graduated from Warren Wilson College in May 2024. Her senior thesis was on landscape ecology in high-elevation spruce fir ecosystems. She went back to the mountain twice during the writing of it. She did not go near the cave. Some places hold what happened in them in ways that resist being walked through again. The quartzite rock, the piece Marcus Calloway shaped over months in the dark to widen a 9-inch gap in a fence, is currently held as evidence in a federal storage facility in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is cataloged as Item 47C in the Cutler Evidentiary File. It is a piece of gray-white rock, approximately the size of a man's fist, with one edge worn smooth from use and the other edges rough as the mountain it came from. It will remain in that facility for the duration of Raymond Earl Cutler's incarceration, and likely long beyond it, in the company of all the other things that document what one person did to 2 others on a mountain, and what those 2 others did, quietly and incrementally, and with extraordinary patience, to come home. The FBI investigation into additional persons of interest identified in the Cutler case file remains open. Individuals with information relating to unexplained disappearances on trails within the Pisgah National Forest, Nantahala National Forest, or adjacent wilderness areas in western North Carolina between 2009 and 2021 are encouraged to contact the FBI's Charlotte Field Office or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Adults.
The metal box is the point where the Calloway brothers' business stops being a single story. 11 recordings. The first one, 2009, 14 years of parallel lives. A legal business, a permit, the respect of neighbors, and what was inside that box. The neighbors who witnessed the arrest were not mistaken in their impressions of Cutler. He really did lend out his saw and shovel snow. It's just that this was only one half of who he was. He didn't look dangerous because he had deliberately crafted that image for years as a working tool. The FBI investigation into the other 9 recordings is ongoing, and that's not just an abstract detail. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you soon.